Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Emily Spranger. I'm an academic trainer in the Center for Teaching and Learning, and we are very, very happy to have one of our own NCU faculty members, Dr. Edward Maggio, join us today for his webinar entitled, Are Social Media Platforms Destroying the United States from Within? Couple of housekeeping things before I hand this over to Dr. Maggio. Excuse me. We are recording this webinar. We will post it in the CTL webinars LibGuide page for future reference. There is a live transcript, so if you would like to see the subtitles, you can hover over the CC option at the bottom of your Zoom and hit show subtitle. Dr. Maggio obviously welcomes conversation in the chat, so please feel free to have conversation in there. And if you have questions, make sure we are putting that in the Q&A function of the Zoom, and we will get to that at the end of the presentation today. And that about does it on my end. I am going to pass this over to Dr. Maggio.
And thank you for that wonderful introduction, Emily. Let me just switch over. And there we are. Well, as noted on the first slide, we are going to discuss social media platforms and their impact negatively on our country. And certainly, as you'll see from the agenda, we've got a lot of ground to cover, but I'm going to certainly do my best in the time that we have. In particular, when we talk about danger, I wanted to be very specific. We're going to start off discussing the nature of domestic terrorism, how social media can foster and help develop incidents that occur within the United States, as well as we'll get into how social media is increasing racism, as well as having negative social impacts. In particular, I want to be very clear too, as a definition, when we're saying social media, what I'm referring to is websites, applications that enable users to create and share content or participate in social networking. I am going to address certainly the impact of what you would call mainstream media, cable news channels and so forth. But I want to make sure that when we say social media, we are referring to any type of technology application where people are having the ability to present themselves and meet, greet, and interact with other members of society. We are going to talk about the Communications Decency Act as well, because that is the federal law that governs essentially all of these social media companies, as well as whether it's doing its job as intended as a piece of federal legislation. We'll get into a little bit of Q-Anon and the January 6th Capitol insurrection, and certainly we'll wrap up with some future trends. Now, some housekeeping. I always like to point out my viewpoints are my viewpoints alone. They're not necessarily that of NCU or my school or department. So if you do have a complaint with anything I say today, I always say just reach out to me directly. You also find that I generally respond very quickly if you have a reasonable comment. Also, I do have some content here. In particular, I have some photos from a particular case I worked on that involved terrorism. So putting aside the fair use issue that I have here, there are some unpleasant discussions that I will bring up photos. So I will cue you as best I can remember. But just be aware of that. Whenever you talk about terrorism, there can be some frightening images. So I just want to make you aware of that. So I do want to point out, certainly, we had the whistleblower come forward in October 2021, Kristen Haig, and I'll get into what she revealed to Congress. But, whenever I have this discussion with people, I hate to tell them when I'm in a dinner party, like, well, to be honest, we've known about a lot of the problems with social media, and these companies were aware of that. Now, how can I make such a bold statement? In particular, as an attorney back in 2017, I was representing a number of the victims that were injured at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. And one of the main things that, as we started to go through the discovery process, as we started to build our case against a number of these defendants, we were trying to understand, how did these people become so radicalized so quickly? A lot of the defendants, did not have a huge history, contrary to what you see on TV. Some individuals, yes, they've been engaged in white supremacy, alt-right movements for years, but you also had participants who showed up who literally in less than a year went from law-abiding citizens to then engaging in this type of movement. And we wanted to know, as part of building our case, how did people become so radicalized so quickly? So that kind of led us what I like to call going down the internet rabbit hole in 2017. We started looking at a lot of documentation, subpoenaing records, and in particular, we found problems with a social media gaming platform called Discord. This is a shameless plug of my article for the Terrorism Journal about this topic, but I want to frame it in the sense that the social media company, Discord, allowed this kind of content to occur. Now, what you're looking at here, and it may be hard to read on your screen, but essentially we have the alt-right members who participated in the Unite the Right rally using Discord to meet one another, to organize. And in particular, they're talking about running people over with vehicles. And that's one of the images you see here from a zombie movie. And they're kind of discussing, we can do this to anybody who opposes us at this rally. You have further even individuals posting memes such as this, talking about, multi-lane protester digester and making jokes about, hey, we're going to run people over and cause mass casualty incidents if needed. So when a lot of these defendants were then going to the media saying, oh, we had no idea that somebody could drive a car through a crowd of people, or we never intended that to happen, or was never foreseeable. Well, from the Discord platform, that's not true. We have the evidence of that. We have the communications, we have the pictures, we have the full discussions. And in particular with Discord, there was essentially an easily viewable timeline that if the Discord social media website had taken action to stop their site being used as an organization platform for carrying out that rally, all of the tragic events that occurred could have been avoided. We learned, for example, starting in January 2017, the company was aware that the alt-right and Nazis were using their platform, not for gaming purposes, but to organize their activities. They had subgroups, they had full discussions about, getting ready to fight. Should we bring weapons? What type of weapons? How do we carry things out? June 2017, a New York Times reporter, Kevin Roos, even went to the company, said, hey, look, I've been online, I've been interviewing some of these people. There's violence that's going to happen. Are you guys doing anything about this? This is occurring on your social media gaming platform. And they did nothing. Ultimately, the rally, ends up happening. And at that point, once the damage has already been done, the company decided to start taking action and start banning wherever they can find alt-right Nazi members using the platform. But for our purposes, in representing victims from the rally, we then had to take another step back. We had to go back another layer. Okay, they got to Discord. Discord became the operational planning platform for the alt-right Nazis to then plan what they were going to do as far as nefarious activities. But you have to kind of go a step back. Like, how did somebody decide to kind of join that movement? And that's where we started to get into the exposure people have based on Facebook, Google, Instagram, and Twitter. And what we learned, and this is now generally most people accept this, but at the time when we kind of came forward in 2017 with these notions, a lot of people did not believe us. And what is it that could be so questionable or unbelievable? Well, unfortunately, social media in terms of domestic terrorism, in terms of racism, has a huge capacity for what we would call online radicalization and or weaponization. Weaponization being somebody who is a normal law-abiding citizen, no intent to ever harm another human being, and now suddenly looking to go out and conduct violence. We learned that Facebook essentially creates an information bubble. You only get to see the news and the ads that are of interest to you. So if you're somebody that, you start a Facebook account, and many of you may realize this now, you start to like certain things, well, you're only going to get bombarded with content related to that which you like, that which is driving your attention. So if I'm somebody, I'm into Adolf Hitler and World War II history, next thing you know, I'm going to get more and more content along those lines. I also am going to get more opportunities to meet like-minded people. So you're stuck in that information bubble without getting any outside exposure as far as your social media platform content to contrary opinions. We also then started looking at what was happening with Google. How did Google influence these people? Well, Google tracks and stores our data that's mined from our search engine use and and the content of our emails. Now that's called a compression algorithm. Now, without getting too far into IT, that's not necessarily a bad thing. When the internet first got going and you had web browsers, called like web crawler, if you typed in a term, you got everything and it was in no logical order and may not exactly be what you want. Google now uses a compression algorithm to search the whole internet and really compactly present on search engine results what would be the most useful to you based on all that other information they have from you. Not per se a bad thing, but the problem is we've learned that Google can also manipulate the data. So if you start searching certain terms, well, it's going to keep providing you more content that can potentially subject you to being exposed to even more things that are going to radicalize you or weaponize you, especially if you start going down the rabbit hole of looking at any type of Nazi or anti-Semitic content. We looked at Android, which is also owned by Google. Well, that tracks your movements and your activity, which is a great if you want to foster, hey, there's a meetup group right in your area for, whatever alt-right, neo-Nazi, local group that you potentially could join. Well, Android can help you locate them and kind of let you know these things are going on. And also too, and we'll get into more detail about this, the algorithmic formulas that are created by these companies, they're all about getting you to react, expose you to articles, expose you to content that's going to get you to love it or hate it, to spend as much time as possible, which then is going to lead the algorithms to exposing you to similar content. And next thing you know, if you're somebody and you're seeing one thing after another that's getting you upset, that's getting you angry in such a short period of time, combined with all of these other factors, and you're not seeing any contrary information, you're just seeing one-sided. You've got the blinders on thanks to what you're being exposed to. Very quickly, you can go from an average person who would never commit a crime in their life to suddenly somebody who's got these fundamental views prepared to carry them out through violence. That's alarming. In 2017, when we kind of discussed this was theoretical. Now, especially after the amount of information that's come forward, it's not so theoretical anymore. I also want to add another quick disclaimer. I'm a fan of Google and Facebook. I'm not somebody who thinks, we should abandon all technology, go live on a hemp farm, grow our own clothes. No, I like technology. I'm a capitalist. So per se, I don't want to, throw out Google or Facebook, but we do have to realize there's some fundamental things that have changed. And in particular, as I have, I remember dial-up. And that's why I have, before we had smartphones, high-speed internet, Wi-Fi. I remember when this phone was literally for just calling, and then later on you could text on it. Wow, that was such a big deal. Now, majority of people don't even use their phones for actual phone calls. We essentially use our phones as mobile centers, and in particular for younger people, it's our social media platform. It is our electronic publicist now, so we can let the world know every single thing that we're doing. And the reason why I bring that up is that the federal law, the Communications Decency Act, that I'm going to dive into more detail in just a bit, has never been adjusted as fast as the technology has changed. I even have here on the slide, we have essentially Wild West corporate growth in technology without any 5-year evaluation. Generally, for any industry, every 5 years, the federal government and state governments kind of look at, are people being harmed? Is everything working? That we have a balance between companies being able to make a profit, which is good, and people being safe. In this sector, we have not had the fundamental federal and state law changes, I would argue, that are necessary to keep up with the impact that our phones and social media have on us. Also, I also want to point out, everything we do today with our social media is based on a surveillance algorithm business model. We give up our privacy in order to access this wild world out there and be able to interact in a social networking capacity. But there are consequences to that. Now, diving into the Communications Decency Act, I want to point out, and I know when my students groan when I tell them you should read a law word for word, that's the same here. In particular, the law provides immunity from liability for and in particular, providers and users of an interactive computer service who publish information provided by third-party users. No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. That's a mouthful. It's important we understand that verbose language. And I even, for those that are not legally inclined, I even provided you a quick little summary. You can't cross what we in the industry call the creepy line. If I'm a social media company, I'm an internet company, I cannot cross the creepy line, which means I cannot have any editorial, manipulation, or bias control over the data. This law was originally created in particular when you had a situation where back in the day, we had dial-up, we didn't have high-speed internet, AOL emerged, and people were creating all sorts of, crazy groups to chat with other people on AOL. And the feds and state law enforcement wanted to make arrests at AOL, and AOL said, hey, and other companies like them said, hey, look, we need a federal law to protect us. We're just creating the canvas. We maintain the canvas. We have no control if some third party comes and posts horrible things on our canvas. We should be immune from any liability. Fair enough. That's how the Communications Decency Act, the CDA, came into being. However, that was the early 90s. Look at where we are now. And I know some people are watching this right now and they're looking at, editorial manipulation, bias control over data. Yeah, there's been a lot of members of these companies going before Congress and having to explain, why is your company doing this type of activity, crossing the creepy line, and yet you're still trying to maintain you get the protection of this federal law. I would argue most, if not all, social media companies have now crossed the creepy line. They use algorithms to essentially edit, manipulate, prevent data from being exposed to us, overexposing us to certain type of data in order to keep us occupied on these sites so they can get our information and or present more ads so they can create revenue. So I like to present for illustration purposes because I know we have some non-tech people here. These are the algorithms. So wherever I'm referring to these manipulative algorithms run by social media company, here they are. So keep in mind, when social media companies are saying now, and even when representatives have gone before Congress and they've stated, well, we're not, engaging in any of this type of behavior. Well, look at what we have right now. Our emails, well, the data is mined by Google. That means there's an algorithm going in getting your data. Think about some of the things you may have emailed or texted. Are you comfortable with that being shared by and kept by some third-party company? We also have Facebook suppresses data and traps us in an echo chamber. As mentioned before, if you start liking certain things, over time, your Facebook profile, that is all you're going to be exposed to. You don't get the contrary opinion. You don't get contrary views. Our search engine results are manipulated. That, as mentioned earlier, the compression algorithm, not a bad thing. But we have now even reports in other countries where, let's say, one side is running for office, they can make contracts with a company like Google to make sure search engine results are done in such a way that people only get information about one particular political issue or one particular candidate or party, which can impact an election. That's direct interference with democracy. Should be a huge concern for not just them, but for all of us, that we can have our search engine results manipulated. And arguably, Google has the monopoly on search engine. Think about it. Even for us to say, go search something on the internet, what do we say? Go Google it. You don't say, I have never heard anybody, you know what? Let's go to Bing. I've never heard anybody mention Bing. When you can make the argument when your company now, if their name is now the noun or verb for carrying out a particular action, you do control the monopoly on that. And as mentioned, we have information that can be censored. And this is even now with the COVID discussions over the last 2 years, there's a lot of complaints from people. Why was my Facebook or Instagram or Twitter account suspended? Because I said a contrary view regarding masks or vaccines. And certainly this has been a fast moving target. What could be fake news today may turn out to be true tomorrow or vice versa. But there's censoring going on. And that should be a concern if social media is censoring people. So I point out, I think companies are no longer neutral. And I do think that the Communications Decency Act has to be reformed, or at a minimum, the bare standard that is in place now has to be enforced. And unfortunately, what you're seeing is a lot of members of these companies go before Congress. We're sorry, we're going to look into it, we'll do more research, but they're aware of the problem and they're not being held accountable. And we, the American people, are suffering as a result of it. Now, I always have people who are a little bit skeptic. So I have people, well, I don't use Google or Facebook. Well, chances are you're using services from a company that do, or in some way, shape or form, you've got a connection, whether you realize it or not, to Facebook or Google. I also like to point out to people who are not aware, YouTube is owned by Google. And I even had one of my students recently is like, well, I don't use Facebook anymore. That's for old people. I use Instagram. Really? Well, I have a surprise for you. They're owned by Facebook, in case you didn't know. You're still dealing with the algorithms. And they're watching what you're doing and monitoring. By the way, is that not the creepiest photo? Something about 3 guys in a tree with binoculars, just a little off-putting.
It really is.
You know, just want to point that out. A little levity during a difficult discussion. I do like to kind of, explore this a little bit further. When we talk about free speech, is our online speech really free? And as I pointed out, it's about getting a reaction, love it or hate it, and liking it and wanting to see more and getting exposed to it. And what we know now with all social media, whether it's Twitter or Facebook, controversial news, controversial discussions equals profit. The more people are having an emotional reaction to something, the more people will spend time online on a social media platform, the more likely that company will make money. One of the more common things that I've had, I can't even tell you as an attorney, numerous times I've had a client completely unrelated. Let's say I did a real estate closing for them, call me up, hey, my Facebook account's been shut down. Okay, well, what are we going to do about it? Can I hire you? Can you sue? Okay, do you have a contract with them? Do you own anything? And I start going down the line of making it clear. Many people don't realize there's a reason why these sites are free. They're free because you're agreeing to give up the right to your data and you're allowing them to use your data. I have the Tinstaffel rule. Tinstaffel is one of the first things you learn in economics, which is the abbreviation for there is no such thing as a free lunch. People who lose their Facebook site or Instagram, their sites are shut down, have to realize, well, you don't own that. That's their platform. And provided you abide by their terms and conditions, they have all the power in the situation. You haven't purchased anything. You're not a consumer where you can stand on your consumer rights. You're at their mercy, whether you realize it or not. And that's a problem. And I have a quote from Professor Lanier here that we cannot have a society in which if two wish to communicate, the only way that can happen is if it's financed by a third party who wants to manipulate them. In other words, if my ability to communicate to the world can be quickly shut down by one of these social media sites because of whatever reason, my speech per se is not protected. It's subject to their oversight, which can be shut down at any time. Nope. And if the domestic terrorism and violence wasn't a concern for you, we have other issues. And I mentioned as far there's a huge problem with social media companies having essentially discriminatory results. In particular, Google and Facebook now, they're working with elementary schools and universities. That's resulted now students, their emails and searches are being data mined now at an early age. We have algorithm programs are being sold to third companies. Why that's a concern? It's a concern because there's a long-term impact of what this can happen. That this data that goes to insurance companies, mortgages, car loans, job applications, all of that data on us as individuals and as a people, when we then use electronic systems to apply for, let's say, a car loan or to try to get a house, there are ramifications that are going to happen. Now, I know I always have people, you're talking a lot, where's the proof? Well, I'll give you just one example of how we've already seen now Facebook can have a negative impact on low-income neighborhoods. And in particular, this story occurred right before January 6th, but essentially HUD went after Facebook because the algorithms that were designed were essentially discriminating against people. In particular, and I have the quote from the Washington Post here, Facebook was violating the law by encouraging, enabling, and causing housing discrimination when it allows companies that use their platform to improperly shield who can see certain housing ads. The Washington Post also reported algorithms are inherently infused with bias. In fact, the whole reason they exist. Now, it's interesting because when it comes to these algorithms, after this happened, and there's been other incidents where state and federal governments are holding these companies to task for discriminatory end results from people using their social media, these companies and their executives say, well, it's not us, it's the algorithms. My problem with that statement is, but your company designed the algorithms. How can you now say the algorithms which are acting in a discriminatory manner are not your responsibility? Your programmers program them, and there was obviously some corporate directive as to how they should be designed in a certain direction. So just to blame the algorithms on themselves, to me, is a weak argument. When I see it being told to the Senate Oversight Committee, I just my head wants to explode. Because otherwise, it's either the algorithms are designed, controlled, and created by these social media companies, or these companies are hiding the fact that algorithms are now some form of artificial intelligence. And if that's the case, we got bigger problems. Now we're going down the timeline of the Terminator movies. And I don't think that's the case. I do think these executives can be held to task for what these algorithms do. Now, I want to take a moment, kind of go through what we learned from Frances Haig, the whistleblower who courageously came forward to discuss what was going on at Facebook. And I have two quotes from her that kind of confirms already what I've been talking about. She noted that the result has been more diversion, more harm, more lies, more threats, and more combat. In some cases, this dangerous online talk has led to actual violence that harms and even kills people. During my time at Facebook, I came to realize a devastating truth. Almost no one outside of Facebook knows what happens inside Facebook. The company intentionally hides vital information from the public, the US government, and from governments around the world. Now, again, I'm not saying a company like Facebook should be broken up, shut down, but we have to now, at this point where we are as a country, where we are socially, on a precipice in terms of a level of division, we have to start to, pull ourselves back off from the cliff. And one of the things we have to realize is, how can we make this system better? How do we hold these companies to have platforms that are not going to profit off us by making us become angry or upset all the time, that it leads to real consequences outside in the real world? Which leads us to our current situation. So why are we so divided as a nation at this point? And I also want to be clear, it's not all Mark Zuckerberg's fault. We've got a number of things going on. Certainly social media is one of the principal areas. And I have here one of the causes, social media's role in political polarization and hyperbole. We've got social media constantly bombarding us with outrage articles, regardless whether if you're liberal, you get content, if you're conservative, you get content, as well as content about, the end of the world, US civil wars are coming, we're in deep trouble. Social media is pushing that even now. Our media channels, whether it's CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, not so different either. They are pushing stories and, in particular, editorial coverage to their base audience, whether it's liberal or conservative, with the same thing, a level of political polarization and hyperbole. We also have fake news. Fake news is a massive problem on social media. And unfortunately, there's not as much policing done as it should, especially outside of social media. That's not, when it comes to non-English speaking social media, there's very little enforcement and stoppage of fake news. We also have foreign influence from China and Russia. That's a whole nother presentation I would love to do regarding the unrestricted warfare that's been going on. China and Russia have cyber capabilities about a generation ahead of us, according to Professor Max Brooks of West Point. And they do influence what goes on our social media. We also have in this country historical issues and cancel culture matters. And I'll get into more detail on a personal note. In my own neighborhood, my own backyard, we've got groups of people that want to teach what actually occurred historically in the United States. We have people that want to ignore anything that's ever happened in the past that's negative. And we've got people that are trying to figure out, how can we do it all? How can we understand and represent the dignity of all people in our country, while at the same time going through difficult history that demonstrates times where humanity has not been in its best. And we have dehumanization. And that's one of the main problems that social media has caused us over the last 20 years. We are not engaging with people like human beings anymore. That's one of my positions. What do I mean by that? Well, look at what social media kind of does to us. Come on, PowerPoint. I have a little delay. There we go. And I entitled this the dehumanization social dynamic, aka how good people can harm or kill other people. Trying to bring this full circle. Just as I talked in the beginning, we wanted to learn how somebody with no criminal record in 1 year could be a full-on Nazi ready to do violence. We have to understand this. The dehumanization issue is a major problem. People are not nice to people as much as they used to be. Think about in your daily lives. I mean, when do we, and some people are like, well, I live here. Okay, you live in a place where everyone's nice. But for a lot of us, we've seen, the decline in people being nice to one another, in manners and just normal human interaction. We're so easy to just, go online and just write horrible things about one another without ever considering the consequences of the feelings of another person. And it kind of works this way. People are capable of committing evil acts if they believe they're doing it for the greater good. And I have a great quote from motivational speaker Teal Swan. I like how she covers this. She said, people see themselves as a hero, victim, or villain. When we hear something we dislike, the person who said it is now a villain, leaving them to feel as a victim and later on a hero to gain their power back. And as a hero, you can psychologically convince yourself to justify any violence because you're a hero. And it's one of those things where, we've interviewed people who've committed domestic terrorism. We've interviewed people after the January 6th attack. And, you look at the resume, you talk to them, they have, they're good people. But what made them think it was okay that they could harm another human being, harm another, protester who is peacefully protesting an opposite view, harm a member of the law enforcement community? And it comes back to this vicious science, this vicious triangle of, I heard or I read something that you said, I dislike it, you're the villain, I'm now the victim, and I want to be the hero. And the only way I can be the hero is to now do violence to you, to cancel you, to stop you. That's a dangerous triangle that we've been in as a country, and we need to get out of it. Which brings us to QAnon, which I'll also mention at the end. I would love to do an entire presentation just on the evolution of QAnon and where we are with everything. And even now, how it's getting, you have pastors in the United States who are promoting QAnon as well. But essentially, QAnon is a convoluted conspiracy theory with no foundation in reality. I say that boldly without reservation because you've had, people posting about things like, even recently, JFK and JFK Jr. are coming back from the dead, according to QAnon followers, to save us. We're in a battle with lizard people from the constellation Draco, that many politicians are secretly lizards. Things like that are part of the QAnon movement. I don't see any credibility to it. And in particular, that's where we kind of get, a few individuals from YouTube and 4chan who kind of launched this movement. Then you had other people, AKA bakers, who promoted QAnon concepts to the next level. They essentially kept pushing this whole President Trump's top secret war with a cabal of criminals, including Hillary Clinton, human trafficking of kids, lizard people, drinking blood of minors, et cetera, et cetera. There's no evidence for these claims. But social media helped, QAnon reach the level of movement that it has, to the point that it could be operational to carry out any type of domestic terrorism or attack, as we saw with the January 6th attack on the Capitol. So let's assume the position. I know I've given you quite a bit, and I do want to get to some questions. Let's assume the position. Companies such as Google, Facebook, Twitter are not neutral public forums. They edit and control data. They now have crossed the creepy line. Let's talk about and assume the position that perhaps companies should be held liable when crimes are being planned on their platform and they're aware of the activity. I always had people, when I've done presentations on my research about Discord and the alt-right and the Unite the Right rally, I always get asked, well, how much did you guys sue Discord for as a company? And the answer is zero, because under the CDA, we have no ability to sue them, even though they knew the alt-right and Nazis were planning an attack and planning violence at that rally on their platform. Their liability is still zero. That should irk you a little bit, because they could have prevented a lot of this from ever occurring. But legally, not morally, legally, they are not responsible. Whether it's moral, I'll leave that up to you. And the CDA, if I haven't driven this home point enough, has to be changed. It's either got to be enforced as it is, or the laws have to be changed to reflect the change in the technology where we are now since the 90s, so these companies can be held accountable. And I want to be clear, I'm a huge free speech component. I don't want to be canceled. But I'm talking about when people are on your social media platform and they are operationally planning to do violence, that's no longer free speech. We've crossed a whole different line there. I'm okay with people saying horrible things. Why? Because then I can rebut and I can say my opposite opinion. That's how free speech works. You got to, for me to say what I want to say, you have to be willing to let somebody say what they want to say, even if it profoundly disgusts you. That's the exchange. That's the social contract that the First Amendment gives us. So I don't want to shut down the First Amendment, but I do want to hold companies accountable if they're aware, if Al-Qaeda or ISIS is planning on their platform, maybe they should do something about it. But this is the technology. This is the federal law solution. How do we fix the humanization issue? How do we start treating people as human beings? Golden rule: be good unto one another as you would want done to you. Now, I want to talk about lessons learned from Loudoun County. Now, in particular, be very honest, I live in Loudoun County, Virginia. Yeah, that Loudoun County. The one you've seen on the news the last year frequently. Yeah, I can't even tell you how many times I've been at work where I'm like, another protest breaking out the courthouse. I'm like, please don't be Loudoun County. And then Loudoun County has like, oh man, not again. I live in a very politically divided state and a very politically divided community. You can probably tell from my accent, I am not originally from Virginia. I'm a New Yorker, moved down here a few years ago. We're living in a state that was Republican, became Democratic, now just recently switched back to being Republican. We've got essentially the liberal crowd that works in DC. We've also got a lot of people wearing MAGA hats, living out in the country. And all these people are all together in this diverse location. And as you've seen on the news, we've had a lot of battles going on, a lot of protests, a lot of conflicts over a number of areas. It's also awkward where I'm at home with my wife watching the news and we're like, oh crap, Steve just got arrested for protesting again. It's like, oh, guess he's not coming to the winery this weekend. Awkward. But there are some lessons that I can say that, living here and going through this, and my wife and I were politically independent. We can walk in both crowds. I can go to a professor's house, who works in DC, and it's a very liberal discussion. We have our Cabernet and we're sitting around the table and talking philosophy. Well, I can also be at the American Legion where everyone's wearing a Trump hat and people stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. and the discussions there are very different. So I operate in both communities, and I get to hear both sides, and it has given me quite a bit of commentary. One of the things I do think we need to do is we need to change the Tinstaffel rule. Right now, we don't own our accounts. We don't own anything. You may not like this concept, but I would rather pay for the ability to control my social profile on any of these sites. Therefore, I own it. Therefore, you cannot just shut me down. Therefore, I have rights as a consumer. Also, too, we need a system like that where if I have my profile and I don't want to be on your platform, I want to then take it to another platform that has better features. This can be a way where capitalism can solve this problem by providing other options and giving us consumer rights. But again, that would require us to do the unthinkable, which is pay for Facebook, pay for our social media. But understand, paying for something gives you rights to it, which in the end is a good thing. We also need less phone time, especially for younger people. There's a big world out there. Time to start talking to people in real life, which brings me to my main point, living in this county, talking to your neighbors. I will say that one of the fundamental problems we have is that people of diverse political views, especially, are not communicating. Facebook, Twitter, Google, all of these sites, everything on our phone has us only talk to people with the same views as us, and in turn, only communicate in person outside of social media with similar people. We have to start, as in every community, start talking to one another. And that's the only way you get a lot of the misunderstandings or the fake rhetoric, how you get this stuff to end. I'll give you two examples. I was at a dinner party with the liberal elites, Cabernet Sauvignon flowing nicely. And I had, one of the professors like, oh, these people, the deplorables, I'm so sick and tired of these conservatives. We should just have a civil war and be done with it. And I kind of, leaned forward, and it's like, okay, well, your idea of a civil war is the 1860s, where, one side men in blue, one side men in gray, they have a battle, and whoever wins, wins. I go, you need to understand something. If there's a civil war again in this country, and God forbid such a thing would ever occur, it's not going to be something where battles are set at a appointed day and time, like it's Bull Run. It's going to be what's happened in the 20th and 21st century. It's going to be like Bosnia. It's going to be your neighbors, attacking you. Complete urban and essentially, and any type of urban house to house, block to block violence you can imagine would be occurring. And I even joked, at first, and then, being very serious with the person who threw this comment out, I said, you need to understand something. You have your philosophy. You like to quote Nietzsche. They have guns, and they know their backyard in the country. And if you think you can just go in there and just condemn a whole group of people and create war with them, that's not going to work. You need to understand their views, and you need to talk to them. You need to engage. How many conservative friends do you have? And it was like silence. It's like, well, that needs to change. Well, who do I talk to? Talk to everybody. I'm one of those nuts. Like I'll talk to even, I'm checking out at Target. I actually look at name tags. I address people by first names. Oh, how are you doing today? What's going on? The more we talk, the better we are. Now, flip side of that, I mentioned, making fun of the liberals. I'm make fun of the conservatives. I was at my local Moose Lodge and talking to a couple people, and there's a news story, and they're talking about socialized medicine in Europe. And guy next to me is like, "Oh, that stuff, that's just, Nazism, communism. They're bringing it here, and it doesn't work." And so, well, look, my wife and I, we lived in Europe. We had socialized medicine. It's not perfect, but I got to be honest, like the stuff that they're saying on Fox News, that's not 100% accurate either. Like you need to kind of do your own research. And the guy stopped, put his beer down, and said, "You know what? I never met anybody who lived on socialized medicine. You're probably right." Now think about it. That's somebody now that just from a simple exchange I didn't know the guy from Adam. Just, hey, just want to say that's not right. Some of that is actually false information. That individual is now considering an issue of a different view, and that's where we all need to be. Ideally, we need to be people that I can have a view. I learn new information, I speak to somebody who provides new information, and potentially either I hold on to my current view or I may change my view because now I've been given new information. That's what adults do. You should change your position if you learn critical new information that completely changes the situation. That's what we all should be doing. And unfortunately, with social media, we don't get that. We're trapped in that bubble, getting fed the same content, and we're not breaking out of the bubble. So I want to, I guess, I could have even had it as a slide point here. We need to start breaking ourselves out of our bubbles, talking to people we would not normally speak to, but that's the only way we're going to start to kind of connect again, not through this, not through the phone, not through social media, but as people. I can't even, I stress this even with my students. There's more power to sitting down with somebody, talking, looking them in the eye, versus just, oh, can I just send an email to them? Like, no. Human conversation, human interaction is what I would believe one of the main ways we can get out of the situation. We can get out of this divide. We can stop hating one another. It's really hard to hate people when you know people and know, what they're about. It's even harder to hate people when you meet people and you get to try their cooking. One of the beauties of this nation is we've gotten more people to get along because people share food, and it's hard to hate somebody when you like their cooking. Just want to add that to the discussion. So in closing, and so we can move on to questions. If you do have any follow-up questions, you can email me, email@ncu.edu. You can give me a call. I'm on the East Coast within reasonable hours. Please know, generally mornings I'm in court or in meetings. So if I don't get back to you, please be patient. I will as soon as I can. Next seminar, as mentioned, I'm thinking about either Q-Anon or unrestricted warfare, which would involve what China and Russia do to us regularly. If people want to post in the chat room, or if you want to email myself or Emily what your preference would be, I would love to know. And as mentioned before, questions are always welcome within a reason. And with that said, let's go to the audience, see what we have here.
Fantastic. We've already had a suggestion about a webinar on the influence of Russia and China for our social media. Couple of first of all, I just like to say thank you for proposing potential solutions. And I just want to drop that personal comment in there. I think that was great addition there. Couple of questions as we go through here. I'm going to kind of start at the top here, and feel free to pop these in the Q&A as well too. Someone had a question: if they start looking at Discord, for example, will they end up with many of the same sorts of ideas promoting some of the same things that would be watched? So if you go on the platform, I guess, are you automatically going to be pulled into that?
Discord at this point, they've hired more people. Essentially they were in a PR crunch where when all the news stories were coming out that, hey, they essentially let this happen, they now have hired more people to watch what's going on. And it's much harder now to start your own Nazi website or subtext group on that channel, because they're aware of, okay, like we're under scrutiny now from the public, and they've increased their terms and conditions, so such conduct and discussions are not available. But there's nothing stopping a group of young people creating another type of Discord or another Facebook, and then having the same problem where people start using that brand new website or social media platform to engage in activity. And it's scary. I've done corporate audits, and that's where a company brings us in, where are we going wrong? And it's scary with social media companies how you can have millions of transactions a day, and they may have 5 people in a room, and their entire job is to basically do spot checking, where they just, all right, I'm going to check X amount of messages today, see if there's anything illegal going on. There's no way to police when you have millions of transactions, right, millions of communicate. There's no way to police that, unless you have either a system that's looking for it and a much larger system of people who are using that electronic system to find it.
Okay. so difficult to navigate through that space. One question that came up earlier, and I think it has to do with something about the social media aspect. Ariana asked this question, and so Ariana, please expand if we need to, but can minors even be given informed consent to use some of these programs? It seems like there's an ethical issue in terms of maybe the age for using some of these platforms.
There is.
Oh,
And that's there is a huge ethical, and right now, I mean, essentially you can go on these sites with, well, first off, I mean, parents should be aware of what their kids are doing, but I got to be honest. I mean, Emily, you may know the same thing too. Many parents who that let their underage kids under 18 create an Instagram or Facebook page, and it's just,
oh,
what's
yes.
the check? What's the verification? How old are you? I'm 43.
Check mark. Exactly. Check mark the box. Yeah.
I mean, the only way to kind of have, we really should have a system where you, and teenagers are not going to like me, you shouldn't access the stuff until you're 18. And two, there should be something where you've got to, here's an ID,
right.
some form of onboarding. Just like if I open a banking account, I've got to provide information.
Right. But then there would have to be more rules and regulations.
And nobody likes that.
Nobody likes that. Yeah.
I don't like rules and regulations either.
Right. But there's definitely a lot of things that have happened as a result, and that not just, political unrest, yes, but mental health.
Facebook knew, with Instagram that, yes, young people using our site may get depressed or kill themselves, but we'll suppress the data, put it away.
Yeah, absolutely. Couple of other things in here. How can schools and colleges mine? Oh, I think Ariana has this question. Question is, how can schools and colleges mine this data ethically? But I think it's the platforms like Google and. So
well, not just that. Think about it. If I could be a university, I can sign a contract with Google where they're going to provide those Google computers at a discount. And as part of the discount, we throw in the contract that for all of our equipment, you agree that any user data that's on those computers goes to us. And you, as the student, you sit down in the computer lab, you have no idea. Because think about it, that's above your level. That's between the university and Google. You're just sitting down there, putting in your information, and all of that data is just going out the window.
Couple of things here. I think some other people just mentioned, just talking about the divisiveness and just the concern for domestic warfare given present political environment. And then just as you mentioned, trying to have a conversation. Negus shared that he went to a Rotary meeting and an individual stated that liberals don't know which restroom to use, but we have a lot of guns. And so this is Negus's just his comment to share in the chat, but it makes me think about your two examples of just people not even having conversations with each other because we're living in these silos.
Yeah, and I get nervous, as I mentioned, where it's not even conservative MAGA hat people talking about civil war. I hear liberal elites like we should just have a civil war and bring this to an end. It's like, no.
Yeah.
I don't think I think the mindset is it'll be like the US Civil War in the 1860s. Like my wife, who she did a lot of NGO work in Bosnia and Afghanistan. She'll tell you one of her concerns is the way we talk to one another on TV and on radio and online. It reminds her of what occurred before the breakup of Yugoslavia and all the Bosnian violence that occurred. Mm-hmm. And again, when there's a civil war, if it ever happens again in the United States, God forbid, it's going to be house to house. It'll start off, in the cities, block to block. And then, in the country, obviously there's going to be violence there too. Nobody wants that. I mean, I've had PhDs talk about we need another civil war. Are you out of your mind? I don't think you can wrap your head around that level of violence.
No, I sure can't wrap my head around that kind of violence. It's not going to be muskets for sure. So let me see here. We have any other questions before we wrap up? Lots of comments, lots of just adding to the conversation. Just some people just sad that folks are divided based off of political stances or preferences. Less smiles, less friendly small talk. So,
And I got to be honest, I deal with this every day where I got to be careful because I have a big mouth. My wife keeps me on a leash because I can say stupid things. But like like we were having coffee at a Panera Bread and heard, group of people like, what the problem is? The 2-minute damn Yankees coming down here. And I'm sitting there, and then one of the people like, oh, that's Eddie. I know him. He got me out of parking ticket. He's cool. Like, and my wife and like that doesn't solve the problem. Like,
No.
like we're just sitting down at a Panera Bread and suddenly like.
Right. I think the dehumanization part is absolutely one of I think, my personal opinion, one of the biggest hurdles to overcome. And you're right. It is about taking the time to have those small conversations with people that might not agree with you. Because I think we need to remember what that was like. We used to have that civil discourse.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of faded. And personally, I feel social media has played a big contribution to that. So,
well, and even my industry, we have now, you can graduate law school without having to demonstrate. You can talk to an audience. And I deal with young attorneys now where they'll be like, oh, my client doesn't agree with your client. All right, so we'll hammer it out in court. What? Yeah, that's how this works. You see, if your client and my client, they don't agree, we then go before a woman or a man in a black robe, that's called a judge, and you talk for a bit, then I talk for a bit, and then I say you're wrong, and I say you're wrong, and you say I'm wrong, and back and forth, and then that judge makes a decision. That's how this whole thing works. And like, can't we do this online?
Oh, no, let's be in the same room together.
It's like, you go in front of the room, like.
Oh my goodness. Well, I do want to thank, there's just been so much conversation in the chat. I appreciate everyone participating there. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. We still have 2 more minutes and I see 3 questions.
Yeah, and I feel bad. There's so many. I don't know if I can get a transcript of the chat comments. There's no way I can read all these in time with the 2 minutes left here.
Oh, I know. Okay.
But certainly, I will say, let us know if you want for the next seminar, if you want me to cover Q-Anon or as far as outside influence, Russia and China, aka unrestricted warfare.
Absolutely.
I can certainly cover that.
And let's do this last bit before we close out here. Dr. Maggio, what's the future of social media generally?
It's a difficult question in 2 ways. The pessimist in me says, as I see now, where there's constantly incidents, owners of these companies go before Congress or their state governments. They say, yeah, we'll look into it. And they're spending millions upon millions on lobbying to make sure nothing changes. Either that's going to be what's going to continue for the next 10 years, where essentially they'll spend the money on the lobbying and they'll keep the politicians at bay, or 2 things could happen. 1, people get sick and tired of this and demand the change, so the change happens. Or 2, you'll have innovators, entrepreneurs that will create companies that are more socially responsible and take the business away from the existing companies we have now. What will happen? Right. I got to be honest, right now, I've only seen option A, which is the amount of Facebook lobbyists I see on the metro.
The money.
Now the meta tags, they have changed those tags. Now it's meta, it's quite a bit.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, thank you for your prediction. I do appreciate it, but we have to be careful when you start making predictions. That being said, please do send me an email or Dr. Maggio about the future webinar discussion. And thank you all so much for being here today. Until the next time, I hope you all have a good rest of your evening.
Take care, everybody.